And we're live. Hello, everyone. Hi, Charlene. Hi, Plant Spirit. Hi, Dungeon Matron. Hope you're all doing great. And our guest today is Peter from Tales from Windsor. How are you doing, Peter?
I am doing great this morning, Carl. Thank you so much for letting me come and hang out on your channel and talk shop for a bit.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I mean, I've been listening to your videos. Oh, hi, Chris Bertrain. Good to see you. I've been watching your videos and we talked a bit on various Discords. So you do say some very interesting things. And you just mentioned before we started that your major was philosophy. I can't see where that's coming from.
Yeah, I've had a couple people in my comments ask about like, did you study game design or like were you a teacher or something like that? And it's like, well, no, but philosophy ends up teaching you how to explain things really well and how to dig into things really well. And so it was applicable to this for sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially like how you dissect various concepts and go over them. So it did help me articulate some things that had thought about that didn't really have the vocabulary, the concepts to express. So that's really super useful. But before we get started, let me just drop a link to the community showcase in the chat. So if anyone wants to show off their builds later in the stream, they can just drop a few pictures there and we'll get to them at the end. So Peter, or should I say Sheriff?
Right.
Would you like to start by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got into gaming? Start from somewhere?
Yeah, so I started playing tabletop games in the year 2000 with the release of third edition Dungeons and Dragons. I hadn't played any tabletop role-playing games before that. I'd played Magic cards and video games. Yeah, I'd played games, but never D&D until a cousin introduced me to it one summer, and I got really into it after that. Third edition and then 3.5 were really it was a really cool time for Dungeons and Dragons because everything was so poorly balanced and there was so much content that it was just really fun when you're a teenager, as a teenager at this time. You have all these crazy books full of all this really wild stuff you can do, and it was a lot of fun to play then. But I've been playing pretty consistently since then.
Yeah, I
Branched
mean,
out into other games, of course, but been playing each of the D&D editions since. Still play them to this day, even though on my channel I'm critical of some of the design choices in D&D. I still have a lot of fun playing it. And it was many years ago with about the release of fifth edition
mhm.
that I started to dabble in wanting to make my own game.
So we're
And I
talking
didn't really
about
do
about a decade now, yeah?
Yeah, about a
All right.
decade ago, I started thinking about making a game and I did little work here and there, and then I wouldn't touch it for a year or two and, just kind of had it in the back of my brain. And then a few years ago, it was basically when the pandemic hit,
Mm-hmm.
one of my friends just said to me, Peter, you should finish that game you've been working on. I said, okay. And so I started working really hard on it. And like here I am now with a pretty robust game and a community now and a YouTube presence and all that. So, thanks, Tim, for telling me to finish making my game.
Okay,
That's where I
Tim,
am
that
now.
was a great contribution to the world of tabletop role-playing
Yeah,
games.
yeah. So thank you, Tim. If he ever watches this video, thank you. Yeah, so that's how I got to it. So I didn't have an education in game design. I studied philosophy in school and I work as a software developer, but all of those are very analytical jobs. And that's just really helped um, with my ability to analyze these systems. And that's what I talk about in the YouTube videos.
Okay, so going to your YouTube videos, you're going over concepts like, for example, the one of your recent ones was about concepts of play. Sorry, cultures of play.
Culture of play, yeah.
So that seemed to be especially significant because on pretty much every internet space, you're going to have people arguing, this game is better, no, my game is better. And then you find people who go like, it's sort of like these little cults and sects and so on. So, no, my cult is better. No, my cult is better than your cult.
Right. Exactly. Well, there's a lot of messy language when people discuss things online, mainly online, right? Because when you're talking face to face, you can explain things and work through it. And I wanted to make that video to try to clean up that language people use to talk about games just a little bit more so that people don't just say like, oh, the way, what's the example I use in the video? Like Matt Mercer and Brendan Lee Mulligan, when they run a Dungeons and Dragons game, it's not really like the rules on the page that they're using so much, but that's not that it's a bad thing. But we shouldn't judge the rules of Dungeons and Dragons based on how that culture plays the game. A group of professional actors and improv comedians, right?
Yeah.
So it's trying to clean up that language a bit because a lot of people will I think I'd say it, they'll judge their favorite game based on the culture of play around it and judge other games based on the rules as written. So they'll say D&D is better for role playing than Pathfinder. Well, really, they're basically
They're
this.
not that
Don't get
different,
mad
are
at me.
they?
They're the same game. Like I know they're really different, but they're in the same category of game. And just because the Pathfinder community is a crunchier community and the game appears crunchier doesn't mean you shouldn't give it the same role-playing grace that you would give D&D, which is also a very crunchy and math-oriented game. So that was the point of that video. So many Reddit rants could be boiled down to people miscommunicating about whether it's a culture of play or the rules they're really talking
Yeah, I mean, so many keyboards have been burnt out on the subject.
Yeah, and I've been tempted so many times as I'm out there in the community, like, I want to respond to this. This person's
Oh, I know the
wrong.
feeling. I know the feeling.
I was like, no, no, that's not healthy. I don't need to engage with, what, a teenager on the internet, probably.
Hey,
Yeah.
I see that Mia Geeked and Dungeons and Dragons have joined us. Hi, guys. Okay,
Hello. Hello, people in chat.
so before we start jumping onto all sorts of subjects, why don't you tell us about Tales from Elsewhere and Clockworld?
Sure. Glad to. So when the reason I wanted to start making my own game is I wanted something that was a little more lethal, a little bit, well, to be honest, more directly violent than a D&D game
Mm-hmm.
was. I wanted to run like action horror games. I liked movies like Aliens, these kind of thing. The Thing. I wanted a system that would play a little bit more like my imagination wanted it to, where, people get their arms torn off and oh, it's gruesome, all that kind of
Something
stuff,
that feels a
which,
bit more dangerous than, you've got
yeah, something a
300
little bit
hit
more
points, nothing can
dangerous.
hurt you. Yeah.
Exactly. And I had played games like, oh my gosh, Savage Worlds. Um, I played other systems at that time, Cyberpunk 2020, the old one, not the new Cyberpunk Red, the really funny one, Cyberpunk 2020 from like the late 90s. I'd picked that one up. And so I just wanted something that was that sort of visceral sort of feeling, but wasn't as crunchy or convoluted as Cyberpunk 2020 can be. Cyberpunk 2020 is very multi-step resolution. So I wanted something faster, cleaner, a little bit more evocative. And there just wasn't really anything on the market at the time. And around uh, not too long after I started thinking about this was years ago, Blades in the Dark came out, which is obviously an awesome game. And Blades in the Dark also used a really novel harm system in that game. And I had been working on, it's so funny, I'd been working on an injury system like, oh, John Harper did something really cool with this as well. And his point, though, is more of a narrative focused structure, right? So my game wouldn't work in Blades in the Dark because I want the injuries to be the focus of the game. So it was all these other games that aren't quite exactly what I wanted from it. And so I started to just build one of my own and hack it apart over and over again, rewrite it over and over again until you have what we have now, which is I think, very fast-paced, violent action horror game that plays very tactically too. I like games where you have interesting tactical decisions moment to moment. Like every player has interesting things they can do and interesting things to decide upon, and that's where it is now. And so the Tales from Elsewhere brand is going to be a series of these books, the first of which is Clockworld, which is a post-apocalyptic Weird West setting. And I simply chose that setting because I love it and I think it's cool and I like Westerns and I like horror. I know it's not the most globally popular setting out there, something more like traditional fantasy, high fantasy, or dark fantasy tends to be more popular, but I just love Westerns. And so Clockworld is the synthesis of my love of horror and westerns. And oh yeah, we can see some art up on the stream right now. So I've commissioned all sorts of fun art, and the one we're seeing shows three of the iconic characters, the pre-gen characters that the playtests use, fending off some monsters. There's some zombies coming at them, and those flying creatures are called Sight for Sore Eyes. And let's see, which are I like cheeky names. Well, this is going to be a rant we can maybe talk about a little later, but the names of monsters should be what the people in the world would call them, not what the omniscient narrator should call them, right? So it should be something fun.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw if somebody's asking about Call of Cthulhu, Dread, and Ten Candles. Uh, I really like Call of Cthulhu. I think that it nails the horror side, and that's definitely an inspiration for me. But Pulp Cthulhu is a little closer to the vibe that Tales from Elsewhere hits because you're a little bit more active. I've never played Dread or Ten Candles, but I've read them and they look so fun. They look absolutely amazing. The spectrum of horror games is actually quite wide because on one end you have things like Ten Candles and Dread, which are primarily a fun narrative experience you play for one night. You have games like Call of Cthulhu in which the players are not meant to necessarily fight back against the darkness. They're meant to run from it. To try to even stand against it is death. You have things like Pulp Cthulhu where you're meant to fight back a little bit more. And then in my game, you're meant to be like, at times more like the soldiers in the movie Aliens who can fight the monsters, but are quickly overwhelmed if they're not careful. That's the quick pitch
Yeah, again, going for
of
that element
that
of risk,
setting.
right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I'm sorry, going for that element of risk again.
Yes, the element of risk, right? Where the players they can get out their six shooters and their shotguns and they can fight the monsters, or like in the image we're looking at, a couple zombies is okay for the players, but if there's more and more of them and more monsters show up, they'll have to start thinking how they'll survive the scene, not necessarily how they'll achieve victory, right? It's not about killing all monsters, it's about surviving the night, getting back to town, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it also fits in with the Western vibe. I mean, like, even, for example, something like the Magnificent Seven, they don't all make it out in the end.
Yeah, that's a good Western reference, right? A Magnificent Seven in the Clockworld setting, it'd be monsters, not bandits. Or maybe
Yeah.
there's bandits that show up initially, but then monsters come in the night, right? And now the bandits and the players have to team up to survive,
Ooh,
right? That would be how
yeah.
you'd run it in that setting. I'm a big fan of multi-threat scenarios. Too much of my time in Dungeons and Dragons was spent lining up the player minis, lining up the enemy minis, and smashing them together.
I know the
That's the
feeling. Yeah.
very standard way to play a fight. And those can be fun too, but I really like the idea of the players having multiple pots on the stove and they're all starting to boil and having to juggle how they handle that. That's just much more interesting, where there's multiple challenges. I don't know if you've seen any of the play tests that I've run, but you can have like, you're just trying to get your wagon caravan across a river and somebody's wagon tips over and pins them in the river and you got to save them. That's the start of the fight. But then bandits attack you while you're trying to save the person. And then some monsters come out while the bandits are attacking you. Now all of you have to try to survive, right? Multi-stage and multi-threat encounters are just really fun.
Yeah, I remember I had taken note of that when I was doing my video about things to steal from Baldur's Gate 3, and that was one of the things literally have more than one thing happening at once.
Exactly. Yeah. If too many fights, like I've run a lot of pre-made adventures in Dungeons and Dragons over the years and run them and played in them. And so many fights are established on turn one or round one establishes the fight, and the fight remains static until one side is dead. Right. And I know that's easier to run, easier to set up when you're doing a pre-made adventure, but I like fights that evolve every couple rounds. I like fights that change. The parameters change, and that makes the players have to think a lot more and I think have more fun.
How do you feel about the same thing on a larger scale, for example? Because again, so many campaigns are like, here's the bad guy, go hunt the bad guy. Rather than, okay, you start going after the bad guy, then you find out maybe the bad guy wasn't really the bad guy, but there was another bad guy. But, oh no, the original bad guy is also still a bad guy.
Right. Well, this is one of those things that as I've maybe as I age, as I've been playing so many years now, when I first started playing, I liked running those really long campaigns, right? Where a story goes on for years. And oh, you thought that was the bad guy? Well, there's an even bigger bad guy. And this keeps going. And you play and play and play the one really long campaign, and you sort of stretch the story as long as you can. My favorite duration of any campaign now is actually more like 6 to 8 months. And I like when every 3 to 4 sessions has completed a storyline now. I like a shorter story, and I like when every session feels like you've made progress. You've
Yeah.
done something, right? So playing shorter games is definitely what I prefer. And I think Tales from Elsewhere is better for a shorter story because there's not as much vertical player progression and the players are easier to kill. And so in Tales from Elsewhere, the player characters never grow more durable, not in any substantive way. You don't start out like a level one wizard dropping from a single crossbow bolt and then being able to take 10 crossbow bolts to the face and walk away. A shot from a buffalo rifle is going to ruin your day just as much on session one as it will on session 15 in my game. So, for that reason, multi-year campaigns don't exactly make as much sense unless you have characters die and new ones join the crew or something, right? It's just not about that long-term progression. So yeah, I like a shorter campaign because you can tell a direct story there.
Yeah, it's definitely a snappier one, and especially if you're leaning into the horror angle. I mean, how long are these people going to keep running away, right?
Yeah, boy, they keep getting so unlucky. Every train they're on derails. Every town they go to is full of zombies. It's weird. Really unlucky.
Okay, so 1 second, we're joined by 13 Racy Appears, Sahacraft, Odinski Gaming, and Evolution of Gaming. Glad to see you guys. Oh, and
Hello.
Campaign Terrain. Hey. And Campaign Terrain is saying, naming monsters like that reminds me of how tunnels and trolls spell names. Not really familiar with tunnels and trolls. I've seen a few things about it, but I think that's way before my time.
Is Tunnels and Trolls from, is that Troll Lord Games that makes that one, Campaign Terrain, or am I
Mm,
misremembering? Is that a different company? I've not read Tunnels and Trolls myself. I'm not remembering.
I think it's been
But yeah,
around
if
since
they
the
if they name
70s, but yeah.
things, yeah, if they name things based on how the people in the world might call them, I just like that better. I like when there's some rusticness to it, right? They'd call it something funny, like it's a folklore thing.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I feel like, for example, the Monsters Manual in D&D is a bit too much like a science textbook.
Right, it's kind of
Yeah,
clinical.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's the word.
yeah. Like it might as well have the scientific names, right, at times. Uh, yeah, it's like what's a good example? People in the world, would they call a Bodak? I don't know. Would they have another name for that particular monster? I like the way cryptids or like local folklore get named. I think that's way more fun. A place and a nickname. So, for example, one of the monsters in my game is called a Kentucky Sawbones,
Is
which is
it,
just how you
let's
would name some sort of
see,
weird cryptid. Oh, did I send you I think that one has an image.
let's see, not this one,
Not that one, not that one.
this one.
Nope, not that one. It's the one with all the hands. I
Oh,
think I
okay.
sent that one.
Let's see. Here.
There he is. So the Kentucky Sawbones is more like what people would call this swarm of severed left arms, because a sawbones is what they called doctors at the time in the late 19th century, as amputation was such a common practice. And so you just slap a location before that, and suddenly you have something like the American cryptid, like a Jersey Devil or the Loch Ness
Yeah, okay.
Monster, right? It's a name.
I
Yeah,
mean,
this creature's really cool.
I mean, that's okay. I mean, Sawbones was in the name I'd have picked for it. I'd probably call it the Handyman or something like that. But
Yeah, yeah, it'd be called the Hand Demon, right? That's how it's often named in D&D. Now, they'll sometimes give the names of the demons in D&D books what other demons would call them, right? Like they'll have like the Glabrezu, or I forget all the names of all these different demons, right? But
There's
yeah,
just
this
too
one,
many of them. Yeah.
yeah, it sounds more like a legend when you say it's the Kentucky Sawbones, right? That sounds more like a local myth now, a local
Yeah.
folklore that you hear talked about in a saloon. And I think that's a more fun way to name things. It also makes your names more unique than just another hand demon, right?
That definitely makes them more memorable as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, hey, remember the time we fought the demon? And yeah, which one? That one or that one or that one or that one?
right.
Okay, we've got a message from Sahacraft. I think nowadays it's really important what Peter told about shorter games. Social media just reduced everyone's attention span, so it's better to keep people hooked up on the story rather than elongate it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So I'm going to put on my old man hat here and agree that social media and micro content tends to make it hard for people to focus on things. I'm still the kind of person that likes to read physical books and does regularly. Like I like long form things, but what's really making me need to run shorter games is my lack of free time, which
Yep.
I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. When I was a teenager, I'd run 8-hour sessions of D&D, right? We'd stay up till 2 a.m., 3 a.m. with pizza and soda. And just, I'd be fine the next day because I could sleep in till noon. But
Yeah,
now,
being young
I'm
is awesome.
lucky, right? These days, a 2-hour session, maybe if I'm lucky, a 4-hour session is all I can really squeeze in. So telling stories that fit into tighter time frames and tighter sessions just lets me experience more story than really long drawn out ones, right? That's the one of the big reasons I do it. Because I agree, kids these days and their attention spans.
Okay, and Campaign Terrain is letting us know that Tunnels and Trolls is from Flying Buffalo Games, specifically in Saint Andrea. For example, Tunnels and Trolls Magic Missile is called Take That You Fiend.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, oh, that's an awesome way to name things. Yeah, Magic Missile is very clinical, very,
Yep.
very sterile. But yeah, Take That, You Fiend is way cooler. And I like when things have names like that, uh, that are a lot more fun. So agreed, Campaign Terrain.
So,
That's a cool one an example of.
regarding Clockwork, do you have some kind of backstory where because I think there's a lot of, from what I've seen at least, there's a lot of work that's gone into that as well.
Yeah. So oh yeah, oh this is a good image to bring up. So the history of Clockworld is that in 1899 there was an apocalypse of some sort, and the players in the world don't actually know the exact details of this, but they know that this other dimension called Elsewhere, or that they call Elsewhere, tore into our reality and destroyed most of human civilization. And the game takes place 100 years after that apocalypse, called the Calamity, where a small fragment of human civilization was able to survive during all of this and is now attempting to rebuild and reclaim some of the land. And so most of the world looks like what's in that image, right? It's ruins of the previous civilization. And that civilization was a little bit more advanced than ours was. It was kind of steampunk, so they had some fun science fiction tech going on there. But now it's all full of monsters and radiation and undead. It's just terrible. And so they're attempting to reclaim it. So they'll build railroads again to try to connect things up and try to survive. And Elsewhere is a place of madness and nightmare. It's very much inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it bled over, so much of the human fears and human anxieties were made manifest. And so that's why so many of the creatures are reflections of the fears and problems that people were facing in the late 19th century. The Kentucky Sawbones relates to the fear of amputation, as an example,
Okay.
which was a very big problem, especially during things like the Civil War, where infection from a bullet wound to a leg often meant you'd lose the leg. So the
Yeah.
Kentucky Sawbones is an amalgamation of severed limbs. There's the Arizona tenor, which is the ghost-looking one you brought up earlier, which is basically a tuberculosis banshee. and it's a
Ah, okay.
reflection of this fear of disease and infection and consumption, as they called it. So Elsewhere is part of the human mind, and it feeds off of the negativity within there, and shapes it into real things out in the world.
By the way,
And so yeah, the players got to
this
pick up their revolvers and try to make it out there against the demons and monsters.
I'm just saying this artwork is really something else. Uh, some top level
Yeah,
stuff.
the artists I've worked with 3 artists in total now, and they are just incredible, absolutely incredible. Oh, and this is another example of a human psyche, a human issue coming to the front. That's a coal baron, and a coal baron is a manifestation of human greed. It's almost like a genie, but an evil genie.
Ooh.
It can look like a normal person, and it tries to tempt people to dig in the mines and look for wealth, but it really it's just trying to curse people into their eternal undead diggers to dig out wealth. So
Ooh,
they're
okay.
kind of a manifestation of human industry. The coal industry in the United States claimed hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people's lives with how dangerous it was. And so this creature is sort of a manifestation of that.
Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the quick of the world there. There's labor robots, right? Then they can go haywire and start attacking people because they're, only partially understood. All the technology of the pre-calamity world, they're trying to jury rig it and rebuild it, but so much of it isn't understood. So the labor bots are fun. They'll pick up a shovel and just start, they can sort of beat you to death with it, and their arms are so strong, they can bend and shape metal because they're meant to lay railroad track. So if they get a
Oh,
hold
okay.
of your arms, with this injury system, they can, yank an arm out of the socket and all sorts of like terrifying stuff.
Interesting because
Or in one of those has a rail spike driving gun, right? That's
oof.
meant to drive rail spikes into the ground. But if he shoots that with you, it can, pin you to the wall. And yeah, they're gnarly. They're great.
I like that you've basically based the based the rule system on an engineering system because I know most game designers start working off one particular aspect of the game. The injury system was one that I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, well, it's funny. The injury system was it was years into thinking about this game before I figured that out, which is crazy because now it's the best part of the system. Uh, yeah, the injury system took a long time to figure out. One of one of my friends who's a indie dev as well, who's been helping me on this project the whole time. He just kept saying, Peter, hit points aren't working. Figure something else out. And so he just kept bugging me about it until finally I came up with a draft, and he's like, "There you go. You found the solution." And then everything fell into place for the game. Like the whole game was so easy to build once that injury system was figured out. Like it just made perfect sense.
So, do you want to give us the elevator pitch for it or the summarize version?
Yeah, absolutely. So hit points are all well and good for most games, but if you want to tell a more visceral moment to moment experience, something more like a wound or injury system is the way to go. So the way it works in this game is there are a certain number of slots you have on an injury tracker. Oh, did I send you a picture of the character sheet? Maybe I didn't.
I believe you didn't. No, but I
Oh,
think I
okay.
think I
That's
can
all
dig
right.
it up somewhere. I'll see if I can find it for well
Sure.
trouble.
Yeah. Well, I kind of describe here. That would have been smart of me.
There's one of the
The
beta
game
rules PDF. Yeah.
materials channel in my Discord has one, should be available. So the way it works is you can only injuries come in a variety of severities. You can have strain, which is like a graze or a flesh wound. You can have serious injuries, which are debilitating but not immediately life-threatening. You have critical injuries, which you should handle right away and are very bad, and then lethal injuries. Oh yeah, there we go on the top right kind of box there. If we can zoom in on the
Ah,
right
there we
side,
go.
there we go. There's the injury tracker. So
This
the way it
one.
works is you only have so many slots of each severity. If you can't fill in, if you don't have room to fill in an injury, it goes to the next most severe slot. If you can't fill in an injury at all because all the relevant slots are full, then you're dead. And each of the injuries comes with complications to them. For example, a bullet wound would make you start bleeding to death, or getting an arrow in your leg would make it so you can't walk on that leg. And so you can give these sort of visceral consequences to getting injured in the game that start getting really gnarly. Like, you can have an arm sawn off. You can, have an arrow in your neck so you can't talk. It can get really gruesome really fast. And rather than
Sounds very 18th
rolling,
century.
yeah, yes, it gets very brutal very quickly. And because the way the dice system works for determining an injury, which I'll mention in a moment, you can skip ahead. It's not like each hit starts on strain and then goes to serious and then goes to critical and then goes to lethal. The die roll determines the initial severity. And so you can skip
Mm,
forward in that process, which removes some of that feeling of attrition. The way it works is when you would get an injury or inflict an injury, you roll a dice pool, usually between 1 and 4 dice. And whatever the lowest result is among all those dice determines the severity of the injury. If you roll a 1, then it's a critical injury. If it's a 2 or a 3, it's serious, and anything above that is strain. And so the better you are at a skill at like shooting your revolver, the more dice you roll, which increases the likelihood of inflicting a more severe injury. If you shoot somebody in the head because there's called shots, the injury is upgraded, which means you can really kill somebody quite quickly with a single bullet to the head. It also means the players can also be injured very quickly if they're not careful. So the game has a lot of active defenses, taking cover, blocking things to try to avoid it. So the game is designed around the players not actually taking injuries constantly, right? It's not like in D&D where you necessarily trade blows a lot. It's trying to avoid getting hurt. And then people start getting really hurt and things start going really wrong. And it's very dangerous and dire. And you have to, stop and try to bandage up your wounds to stop the bleeding. And it becomes a bloody mess and it's great.
I remember that in one of your videos you were talking about how you wanted to avoid the whole death spiral because in some games we have damage related to your condition, sorry, penalties related to your condition, and then you just get worse and worse and worse at doing things, and you just increase the risk to yourself. Having these conditions makes it a lot more interesting because you're bleeding, you have to take care of that bleeding, but you're not actually impaired in a way that takes you out of the game.
That's right. Yeah. The key, so a death spiral, as people like to call it, is a concern because you don't want the players to get injured and then they get injured again and they don't feel like they can do anything about it. Games like I think Call of Cthulhu kind of feels pretty death spirally at times. Like I love the game, of course, but that one has kind of a hard death spiral because you become numerically worse very quickly in a lot of those kinds of games. In this one, each injury is more like a problem you need to solve, is maybe how I would describe it, right? It's a new challenge that will impede you in some way, but you can treat that one injury and the complications are ignored. Like you can stop the bleeding. You don't erase it from your sheet, so you still get things filled up, but you're not like getting worse and worse, like a stacking penalty to all rolls. There's nothing like
Mm.
that. Or like, well, if I want to be able to run faster, I better get this arrow out of my leg, right? Or if I need to stop the bleeding, I better bandage it. Um, that sort of thing. They become problems you need to overcome rather than like a slowly dropping, like the sword of damage, like a sword slowly just coming down. It's not meant to feel quite like that, like an inevitability.
On a micro level, it goes back to what you said earlier about having these multi-objective encounters. Like every injury adds to that.
Exactly. Yeah, they become new problems to solve. What was an easy fight against the zombies, let's say, and you're running from some zombies, zombies are slow, is pretty simple until one player's leg gets caught in a bear trap
Ooh.
and then they can't walk, right? Not only do you need to get them free of the bear trap, but now the leg is broken. There's a new problem to solve, right? This thing just got harder and more complicated. And it's at the end of the day, you're still counting a number of times you can be hurt before you die, like hit points, right? There's still that element. But each time you get hurt, that packet is more narratively interesting and mechanically interesting than just taking 1d8 plus 3 damage, right? That's the goal. So yeah, it definitely adds to that. We have new problems we need to solve in this fight. Things are getting bad. Or maybe you have an NPC that got bitten by a zombie, and that's a new problem you need to. So not even the players are injured, but another character has been injured, and you need to save them. Right? It creates some tension there that is really fun. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking. going back to the reason that you, sorry, not the reason, the focusing on the injury system, I also see why you adopted the rule of cruel, which I think is an amazing rule, and I'll probably start using in every game.
Right, yeah, the rule of cruel is so fun. Well, like I was kind of saying in some of my videos recently about games should communicate to the reader the type of experience they should expect, right? They should tell them how the creator imagines the game to be run, and things like the rule of cruel can help do that. And for those that watching that aren't familiar with it, it basically says whenever there's a rules discrepancy or confusion or a need for arbitration, or you wonder what should happen and it's not clear, pick whatever is the most brutal and visceral and destructive and hurts the most people, because that's the kind of game this is supposed to be. For example, last night I was on another channel running a live game with Avenue Studios, and it was a ton of fun. And one of the players basically like had a net launcher and shot it at two bandits. And I thought, that's really cool. I wonder what would happen, because the bandits were standing next to a herd of cattle. And I thought, well, the rule of cruel would say the bandits get launched into the group of cattle and the cattle stampede over the bandits. That's just the most violent thing that could happen in this situation. And so that's what I had happen as the game master. And one of the bandits dies. Like, it was really, the player was like, "Oh, I was just trying to capture them. Whoops." But that's what something like the rule of cruel tells you, and the players and the person running the game, hey, let's make this as gruesome and gnarly as possible, right?
Okay, so basically Django Unchained rather than Bonanza.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the rule of cool in D&D is what a lot of people use when they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, because that's the story of heroic fantasy, of feeling like a badass. You're feeling powerful, and I think the D&D 2024 rules even say, the dungeon master's there to delight the players. We're all supposed to laugh and have fun and feel great. While a game like from Tales from Elsewhere, you're meant to challenge the players and make them feel tense. And it's a very different experience. And so rule of cool and rule of cruel serve different purposes for different games, right? Though to
Yeah,
be honest, when
absolutely.
I run D&D, I basically run it with the rule of cruel in mind anyway, because I like to run more. I run D&D really differently when I do run it. I don't do that so frequently these days. But I like to run it almost action horror myself. I take some of the stuff I learned from Tales from Elsewhere and I put it into D&D.
Don't you find it a bit difficult to run it that way? With because basically fifth edition characters are really, 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 really tough. It's like how do you threaten them?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of the whole reason I made Tales from Elsewhere, right? So I could, but right. So it's because it doesn't work as well in Dungeons and Dragons. So D&D, the characters are very powerful, but when I run a homebrew D&D game, I actually I limit what people can pick and play a lot. Like, I cut it down to fewer options. One of my favorite campaigns that I ran, the players could play no magical characters and only humans.
Okay,
And it was really fun. The players loved it. Instead of picking a species, they picked a human culture, and those gave them their stat bonuses
okay,
and their benefits. Because the different human cultures, it was about a world in which it is in the decline. No one's seen an elf or a dwarf for 100 years or more, right? It's a civilization in its fall, like the fall of Rome, right? Where
hmm
everything got really dark ages afterward. So it was a fantasy world like that. So it was just these few human kingdoms, and the players had to go out and discover what happened to magic and where did it all go. And so when the players don't have fireballs and teleports, they're much easier to threaten.
and
uh,
healing especially.
yeah, there's no magical healing, right? It was, I think, a ranger using the no magic ranger variant they had released, a rogue, a fighter, and a monk. And not the magic kind of monk, just like a basic punchy monk. And so that group, normally you face a horde of enemies and the wizard can fireball them. But now the players have to think, oh boy, we have no way to fight a horde that easily, right? It becomes more tense. So it just takes a lot more effort, but you can get D&D there just with a lot of work. Um, but it's much better to pick a game more suited to the genre, I think. But sometimes, you have a group that only really wants to play D&D, so you run D&D for
Yeah,
them.
fair enough. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
at the end of the day, any rule set is more like a toolkit, and you're not going to use a hammer for when you would need a saw.
exactly. Yeah. And that's
Hopefully,
what's
yeah.
so frustrating sometimes about discourse and discussion about rule systems is there's a lot of people out there that think Dungeons and Dragons is the universal tool. And it's really not.
It's
And like I said, I
definitely it's
do.
definitely marketed that way. Let's put it that way.
It's marketed that way. And like, don't get me wrong, I do love Dungeons and Dragons. I still play it all the time. I just think that people overvalue it as a rule system when there are universal systems out there like GURPS or even things like Open Legend. There's other universalist systems. Cipher system is a universalist system that you could run any type of genre in because they release genre books, right, for
Mm-hmm.
each of these. Like I ran a lovely superhero game in Cypher because there's a book for running superheroes in the Cypher system. It was really fun. Can't really do that in a D&D game. Not really. So I'm definitely there's so many games out there, right? There's so many cool games. I want people to break away from the big standards sometimes and try something else, right? Even if it's not my game. Yes, try my game, but try anything, right?
Like they create different experiences. I mean, like,
Mhm.
and let's face, most people playing Dungeons and Dragons are probably playing epic fantasy.
Right. Yeah, that heroic journey of gaining like the hero's journey, getting really powerful. And like my game would not work well for that kind of play, right?
Yeah,
A
it's
Tales
the
from
opposite
Elsewhere
experience. Yeah.
game, yeah, it's not designed for that experience. Even though the next book I do want to work on is a medieval fantasy book for using Tales from Elsewhere. That's
Ooh,
the
okay.
next one. Oh, I can't wait.
Def-
I have
def-
so many ideas
Definitely
because I
sign me
want
up
to
for this one.
write. It's going to be good, but very much more like Dark Ages
Mm-hmm.
type of fantasy rather than D&D is more of like a late Renaissance kind of mixed with everything in. Like Dungeons and Dragons fantasy is much later. I would describe it more like Renaissance. But I want to do one that's more like the Dark Ages. I want to do like
Nice.
just after Rome falls type of time period. Because that works better for action horror anyway.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
the
no,
next
definitely.
one will be medieval. But I have ideas for, oh boy, too many ideas for different setting books. But all using that core action horror resolution system, just change from, Westerns to medieval fantasy to science fiction or whatever it would be. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm really happy it's Western team, the setting edition, because that genre is really underserved.
Yeah, there's no big mainstream attention that Westerns or particularly weird Western or horror Westerns get. These
I think
days,
it's
the indie
only
scene,
Deadlands, pretty much.
yeah, Deadlands is the big one. And I am a fan of Deadlands. I think it's super cool, especially how, it's integrated poker hands into the role-playing game, right? It's super flavorful. Um, what Deadlands and my upcoming criticism of Deadlands has nothing to do with how awesome that game is. So for those out there, but for example, using the poker system as a huckster in Deadlands is super cool and slows the game down like crazy.
Mm, okay.
It Some of the resolutions there, I don't think are very snappy. They're cool, but not snappy. Playing the version that's in Savage Worlds is a little cleaner, if memory serves, because Savage Worlds is a little bit cleaner than the prior edition of Deadlands. But Deadlands is itself kind of high fantasy Western horror. There's a lot of magic and sorcerers, and it's a bigger setting with like a bigger set piece, while Tales from Elsewhere is more narrow. The player characters aren't very durable, and they can't cast big spells or anything like that. They can gain some supernatural abilities, but they're very narrow and limited in their use. And so it zooms in a little bit more and is more about a little bit more science fiction than high fantasy than Deadlands is. But Deadlands is super cool.
Getting away from D&D and playing other systems was why Steve started the Tales from the Backlog stream. Yeah, Tales from the Backlog has a great channel. Should probably give him a poke and
Yeah,
play a couple of games with them because they do these different games pretty often.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mia. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great just because in this day and age, if you, well, ignoring artwork, anybody can make a tabletop role-playing game. Like you can make one, you could post it on Itch or you could post it on Drive-Through, right? It's really not expensive to build a role-playing game if you have an idea for one. So there's so many out there right now. The expensive part is like paying for layouts and artwork, of course, but to just build a rule system and run it and play it and get it out into the world is really easy. And so there's so many games out there. Like I believe there's the perfect game out there for every person if they just go looking hard enough for it. Because I mean, there's so many super specific games that get made, right? Like really narrow. Like what is the one that was it called? Eat the Reich was one that came out a while
Okay.
ago. Have you ever heard of that one, Carl?
I don't think so, no.
So it's really very narrow. It's mostly powered by the apocalypse, but the characters are all how to describe this? It takes place in the 1940s in Germany, and all the characters are like vampire monsters working for the Allies, and the missions are to go and like eat Nazis or something weird.
Okay, that
Like
is
it's
super specific.
super
Yeah.
specific. Yeah, it's like really narrow. And it's just about that one play experience. But if somebody out there wants that game, it exists, right? You get really specific things. Or there was one that somebody I know was working on. I'm blanking on the name of the game, but it's about kids who all have supernatural powers, who have escaped from like a government facility, and they have to come together to try to, support each other or something like
Oh, okay.
really
So kind of
specific
like
games.
Stranger Things kind of thing.
Yeah, very Stranger Things sort of feeling. It's like there's a
I,
game out there for everybody.
I,
So, and I like that.
if I'm not mistaken, I think the most super specific game I've ever heard of. I've never played it. I've just read the rules and I was like, okay, this is interesting. I will find it for future reference. But I think it was called Everybody is John or something of the sort.
Yeah, right.
We're
Everybody's
just
John.
basically playing voices in the. All the players are playing voices in the head of a guy called John.
Yeah, yeah, those kind of games are really cool. A buddy of mine made a one-page role-playing game, right? So it's just one page back and front, inspired by Disco Elysium and Everybody's John in that same sort of
All
thing,
right.
where each of the players are one part of the fragmented psyche of a character that has amnesia. That's the
Oh,
setup of the
whoa.
game.
Okay.
So the goal of the game is you're going to, over maybe one or two sessions, you tell a mystery where the players have to work together to figure out who they are and and solve a mystery. So it's a super cool game. Are you familiar with DC Comics,
Yeah.
like comic books and all that?
Yeah.
I figure this community has a lot of overlap with comic book people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I ran a session of this game where the players woke up, they didn't know who they are, and they had to figure it out. But they started to realize that they're in Metropolis and that they have powers and that they can fly and they're really strong. And they're like, oh, we must be Superman, right? And they had to figure this thing out. But it turns out they were Bizarro, who thought they were Superman. If you know who Bizarro is, the clone of Superman. So with this game's systems, you can tell these really specific, weird stories, as each of the players was only part of the fragmented mind of Bizarro. It's like, what a cool game. Super specific.
Yeah, I mean, and going for the whole fragmented memory amnesia thing, it's pretty much 80% of the plot of Moon Knight. So,
Yeah, exactly. There's this other game. I've never gotten a chance to play it, but I really want to at one point. It's called Good Society, and it is a GM-less, dice-less game that is a Jane Austen
oh, I heard of that as well. Yeah,
simulator.
yeah.
Right. And so everybody's these characters and basically in a Jane Austen novel. And there's no rules for fighting or violent resolution. It's all about
How to hold your
interacting with
how
these
to hold your cup.
yeah, yeah, it's building relationships and gossiping and maybe betraying one another, but not like in a violent way. It's living out that sort of Jane Austen fantasy. And that is the so specific. You can't run a heroic fantasy game with that system, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. At the same time, I'm happy that that kind of thing exists because it's not the kind of thing I would play probably. It's not really my jam, but
Yeah.
I it just goes to show that there are so many options and so many ways this hobby can expand.
Exactly, right? Like, yeah, The Good Society is not a game that I'd be itching to play frequently. It's not normally what I would do. I just love that it exists. I just
Yeah,
think that's
yeah.
so cool. Uh, yeah, and that people have broken out of traditional structures and built just really interesting games, like ones that don't even need a game master. Good Society's played without a game master. None are needed because the players each have the same level of narrative control over the story. And you basically buy truths from each other with the exchange of these tokens where you can agree to modify the story. It's really interesting. Totally different. But yeah, there's no, killing goblins or fighting demons in that game, sadly.
I mean, maybe with the Pride and Prejudice and Zombies expansion, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Add a little Tales from Elsewhere plus Good Society. Well, I'll make a combo there.
I mean, it sounds funny, but I don't think it's com- a completely unworkable idea.
Right, basically, if the players ever need to do a social like session where they need to infiltrate high society in my game, I'll just download a copy of Good Society and say, all right, we're doing this now.
How do you run?
I do plan on, I do actually, it is an interesting case study from a design standpoint
Mhm.
where most games resolve social situations like I roll my bluff check or I roll persuade. But it is really interesting to look at how games that are purpose built specifically for resolving, where the whole game is resolving a social situation
Yeah.
and learning from that, right? So I think it's worth learning. Not for the first book of Tales from Elsewhere, right? Clock World is just about cowboys shooting zombies, right? It's not about that. But some of the subsequent books I want to work on are more mystery focused. So taking the game in that direction as well. And so at that point, I might bust out a copy of Good Society and just see what I can learn.
How do you handle the social scenes usually? Because sorry, mostly when
Yeah.
I stuff like that, it's like I avoid using too many dice. So social resolutions usually I will have maybe one die roll in extreme cases, but usually if someone gives me a good plan or a good speech, yep, whatever it was, it's done.
That's basically what it is for the Clockworld book because I'm a firm believer that a game shouldn't over mechanicize the
Mm-hmm.
stuff that isn't important to the core gameplay. And so for this first book, it is very much just action horror sequences. And so the rules that surround that are expedient. They're simple and quick to resolve. So if you were going to try to convince the bandits to stand down, you would roll just a quick like bravado check to intimidate them into standing down. The storyteller would set a difficulty for it. You roll. If you succeed, you're good. Let's move on to more shooting kind of thing.
Okay,
So yeah,
so
the way
so
it's
if
set
you
up
if you
here
can't
is
blow it up, you
very
don't need
smooth.
rules for it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's supposed to be expedient and simple because it's not the emphasis of the game. And there's a lot of subsystems around that as well that try to get out of the way so that the injury system is still the focus, right? The violent resolution. Like crafting in the game is super simple. If you pick a crafting edge, when you rest, you just make a couple items. You just get to pick some items. There's no tracking resources, of how many pounds of scrap metal do I have? There's none of that because it's supposed to be quick. So if you're an apothecary, you could whip up some laudanum during a break, right, during a rest or something. But there's no complicated multi-step rules there. It's expedient
Nice. Yeah.
because it's not the emphasis.
I do find that a lot of systems tend to over-engineer a lot of peripheral mechanics.
Yeah, yeah, and it's when everything is at the same level of complexity, but each is its own subsystem, as in they're not using the same structure in each, it just gets kind of burdensome to play. For example, if your combat system is very complicated and fun and good, your crafting system is also very complicated and fun, and your magic system is also very complicated, and your travel system is very complicated, and none of those are using the same DNA, the same core structure. It's just a headache to move through them. A game like Blades in the Dark is a good example of having everything working the same way.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking your way into a nightclub or in a sword fight or sneaking into a building, it all uses the same type of resolution and the same level of complexity, right? It's the same type of roles. And so it's all smooth no matter what scene you're in. When a game, I'm trying to think of a good example. Pathfinder Second Edition has pretty robust rules for all of the subsystems, right? And that's a draw of the game. It's a strength of the game. But if you needed to craft something, it's a whole other thing you got to go look up, right?
Yeah.
To craft an item.
I mean, when you were talking about this, what came to mind was Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, because you've got some systems work with die 20 resolutions. Some systems, say for example, just the difference between wrestling and combat. Wrestling works on no, actually, wrestling was also on die 20, but it had this whole raft of modifiers. Thief
Right.
skills work on a percentage. The other thing work on a different set of dice. So
Exactly. Yeah, it's just it becomes more onerous, more cumbersome to move between each of the systems if each one is so different and each is so complex. There's nothing wrong with building a really big and robust game. It's just when each of those systems is so different from the next, it is kind of cumbersome to play at the table. Yeah,
yeah,
so
so
that's a long story,
mm,
long story long. That's why social resolution in Clock World is so simple. It's because it's not meant to slow the gameplay down with a subsystem that you have to interact with.
so again, going back to horror and Western tropes, you don't have these long social exchanges in those movies or those settings. You just have a couple of one-liners and then move on to the action.
Exactly. A movie like Die Hard is a great example.
Yeah,
There's a lot of, John McClane, Bruce Willis, he does talk to other characters, but like you said, it's a couple one-liners and then you move on to the rest of the movie. Or Aliens, there's a lot of dialogue in that movie, but it's just there and it's light and quick and it communicates quickly. And then you're back to running from the xenomorphs, right? And trying to seal the doors before they get in, right? That's the emphasis of the movie. It's not when in comparison to Alien, the first Alien movie, which was about building slow tension. There's a lot of dialogue in that movie, right? It's about
yeah,
building this
yeah,
up slowly. It's a different pace. Or a movie like The Thing, which is a movie about paranoia and distrust. And so the dialogue is important because that's part of the tension is people distrusting each other, who's already been replaced,
yeah.
who
Good point.
hasn't. So anyway, yeah, it's different purposes in different stories and in different games.
Okay, you mentioned the tactical earlier when you were talking about the combat system, and
Hmm.
I want to ask you, how do you define tactical? Because I've everyone seems to have their own definition, and I swear that I swear for some people, I think the definition is just it has a grid, which is like
That's a grid.
I'm not kidding.
That
I mean,
huh
this is not tactical because it does not have a grid. And I was like, ah,
that's really funny. Hmm. I don't agree with that statement, of course. A grid is not necessary for tactical play. So okay, here's my opinion on that and why I think my game is tactical. So the actual definition of tactics and strategy is that tactics would be small scale in the moment decision making. Strategy is long term or high level decision making, right? In combat, that's how you would describe it. Strategy is which territories you're going to attack on a map, while tactics is the decisions on where you move your troops in the moment, right? If we're talking about a war game.
pretty much. Yeah.
So a tactical game is one in which each player has decisions moment to moment that have a dramatic impact on the success and failure of the game. That there are branching decisions. I can't make a branching decision they
I think
get
I
to
know what you mean.
make every turn, right? Where there are uh, pros and cons to weigh, decisions to make, risks to take to weigh on every turn of the game, or at least as frequently as you can. A game that's more about strategy is more about picking character build options outside of the moment to moment. Like building a powerful character is a strategic choice, not a tactical choice. How you use the character would be tactical. So, how many decisions that branch that you get determines how tactical the game is. So, as an example, I was in a Dungeons and Dragons game on just Friday, and I'm playing a barbarian, and I love the
Yay!
barbarian. Yeah, it's like I feel like I keep talking about the barbarian in all my videos, and I really need to switch it up a little bit. It's just always top of mind because I'm playing one. So I'm level 6, and I have almost no tactical decisions to make in
Except the agent
comparison.
hits, right?
Yeah, I activate rage, and I go and I attack the enemy twice. That's all I really get to do. I could try to position myself. Sure, there's positional stuff. I'm trying to protect my friends. But that's just like what everybody gets. The barbarian itself, I'm not getting a branching, interesting decision tree I get to interact with. There's no resources I really have to play with. It's really just, do I reckless attack or not? And the answer to that is almost always not, because I'm the party tank. And so I need to stay alive more than I need to deal damage. I'm sword. I like the image of a barbarian with a sword and a shield. That's more iconic to me than a big weapon. I may be in the minority there. But I don't have a lot of tactical decisions because Dungeons and Dragons doesn't give you a lot of them. There's not a lot you
Unless
can.
you're a magic user. Yeah.
Yeah, magic users get lots of tactical decisions, or a battle master fighter gets lots of tactical decisions. A ranger with the spells, right? Paladins, they have these extra tactical decisions they get to make. And the core resolution system in Dungeons and Dragons, the core combat system, you can do things like try to shove somebody prone, you can try to grapple them. They're just not all that effective because of the attrition nature of fighting, right? You need to deal hit point damage to end the fight. That's just generally how it works. And in that game with that dungeon master, we're playing very traditionally in that by the rules, kind of pre-made adventure type stuff. It's a lot of fun, but it, I don't really have a lot of interesting decisions I get to make that are actually worth making, maybe is a way to put it. So in Tales from Elsewhere, the core resolution gives the players a lot more tactical choices they can make, regardless of how they've built their character. Because whenever you attack somebody, you can choose where on the body to attack. The bulk, the brim, or the ace, and these have ramifications. The weapons matter a little bit more because they'll do different complications, you know, um, and they'll have some things are more resistant than others, like hitting those labor robots. You want to use something like a sledgehammer
You definitely
to
don't want to
bash
punch
them
them. Yeah.
in. Yeah, you don't want to punch them. You don't want to try to slice them with a knife. You want to get like something to crush them as an example. So the players have a little bit more tactical decisions there. And because the players are on a shared turn rather than individual initiatives, they all act at the same time and can mix their actions however they want. Everybody gets to participate in solving the problem and making those tactical decisions on how they help each other. So there's just more baseline you get to think about. Do I do I think I can take the zombie out with one hit to the head, or do I need to just hit it in the leg to slow it down and escape? Everybody can make that question, can do that determination. Unlike in D&D, where the Battlemaster fighter could choose to use a, what is it like, tripping strike, or the one that slows them. I'm forgetting the names. They can choose between a disarming strike and a tripping strike and all these things, right? They can make that sort of decision, while the barbarian can't. So that's why Tales from Elsewhere is a tactical game, is because there are a lot more micro decisions, these small scale decisions that every character gets to make, and they matter a lot because all it takes is one good hit to take out a lot of enemies. So setting it up together tactically matters.
Okay. Question about the shared turn. How do you usually run it? Do you like give the players a few seconds to discuss a plan between them? Do you have them argue
Mhm.
for a few minutes? How,
Yeah.
how does it work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the idea of side-based initiative, games have to be set up to handle that correctly, and that's something we can maybe talk about later. You can't do side-based initiative in D&D because it would be a slaughter. Whichever side goes first will just
Yep.
probably
Yep.
win. All the fireballs and magic missiles all just start flying turn one, and there's nobody left to fight. Anyway, the way I set it up, because it goes the threats act, and then the players act, and then the threats act, when it's the player turn, I'll prompt the players and say, okay, here's what here's what's threatening you. I'll remind them what changed over the threat turn. Like, okay, this person's drowning, this person's grabbed by that blood oiler, and this person's shot. What do you do? Like, how do you want to handle this? And then to try to get them to start talking. As D&D players or people that are used to more structured initiative, they tend to, okay, I'll go, then you go, then you go, then you go, right? But in this game, I could get you free. I could pull you out of the river so you're not drowning with one action. Then you could take an action and go run and do something else. Then I could pull out a gun and as my second action, shoot a different guy, right? You can really work together to problem solve. And the game, players learn quickly that you need to do this because the game is so deadly. It's meant to be challenging, but that the players have control over their success and failure. If they work together, they can solve almost any problem. It's just a matter of what decisions do they make and what risks they want to incur. If everybody acts on their own, it gets a lot harder because no
Yep.
one character is all that strong. And in some of my playtests, it's always really funny. I'll run the same fight for multiple groups to try it out. So yeah, one group will all split up and go run off, and they'll have a really hard time. And then a different group, without my prompting, will all stick together, working together and protecting each other, and they get out unscathed. So it's set up to such that players will learn. The first person that runs off and falls, gets in a bear trap alone with some zombies will be like, I really should have stayed with the group. Because
I,
then the other player could free them right away. Like you could work together to solve it. So
I like
it
that
definitely
it's
takes some getting
another
used to.
layer. That's another layer to the thinking for the whole strategy and tactics thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm really partial to side-based initiative now. I just because I've been running it for my game for so long. It's so frustrating when I'm playing a game like D&D and I want to help another player. Like I want to like sync up with them to do something. But oh, their initiative was a lot lower than mine and all the enemies go first, so I can't. I can't. There's nothing I can do to like sync up with them just because of the way that initiative is structured. So
Yeah,
big fan of
I
side-based.
find that super frustrating as well. But at the same time, I think it serves the style of that game because everyone is a superhero in their own kind of thing.
Exactly, exactly. And side-based initiative requires that everybody have lots of things that they can react to. They need to be active during the turn that the other player the other group's turn. So in Tales from Elsewhere, everybody can dive for cover. Everybody can try to block actively. You have reactions you can use. Dodging incoming strikes, yeah, diving behind a wagon to avoid the gunfire. Without that, whichever side goes first just kills everybody instantly,
Yeah,
right? You have to be able to defend yourself. Otherwise, it does become a very much an alpha strike. Like in D&D, as I'm sure everybody who's played D&D has had this happen, all the players roll really high on initiative and all the enemies roll low. And wizard fireballs all the enemies, and then the ranger takes a bunch of shots, and then the fighter just cleans up what's left, and the fight's over. Right? That's the kind of thing that can happen when all the players go first. And the reverse of that, if all the enemies go first and the players don't get to act, they can get really messed up and they don't have any way to prevent it, right? They're not interacting when it's not their turn. So that's the other way, the other piece of it. You have to have a game that's set up to accommodate turn-based initiative or a side-based initiative. Otherwise, yeah, doesn't work.
I get you. Yeah, does make a lot of sense. So apart from initiative and encouraging players to work together this way, another thing that I was wondering about is about skill use, for example, or skills in your game, because it doesn't have the whole massive table of skills, which I sometimes
Right.
found to be a bit how do I put this? In games where you have a list of skills, even if a player could, for example, I don't know, climb something even without the skill.
Yeah.
Especially beginner players would not attempt it because it doesn't say so on their character sheet.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
how do you work with that in Tales from Elsewhere?
That's a good question. So in Tales from Elsewhere, there are skills. They're more, I call them skill tributes. They're like a mixture between an attribute and a skill.
Mm-hmm.
There's just, oh yeah, there we go. So yeah, all the way on the left side would be the
There we go.
skills. So there's just 11 of them. And this is the only numerical roll you make.
All right.
The defenses and the reactions are all derived values from your skills. And what you can do is much more open-ended in this game, right? Like you said, there's not a list of there's nothing on the sheet that says shoving somebody over, like trying to throw somebody off of the second story of a saloon. There's nothing that
Hmm.
says like how good I am at that. But that would fall into brawling. That's the skill you would roll, and that's what you'd end up doing. Um, because everybody can do so much, there's actually only a handful of things that apply to everything. And this means that it's easy for characters to dabble and try other things. And the math backs this up. So in a game like, we'll just keep using Dungeons and Dragons as an example. Dungeons and Dragons has what we call a high variance resolution system. It uses the 20-sided die. And so you could set a DC 15 skill check. Everybody has a chance of succeeding on that. And even somebody who's pretty good, like +5 or +6, has a pretty high chance of failing it too, right?
So
It's a
there are
high,
no sure shots kind of thing.
right? There's no sure shots. And that's because D&D wants to have the fun moments of the randomness of it. They want people to watch that D20 and go, oh, there's the natural 20, right? It's about that variance in the game. Serves their purpose as well. But at the same time, it's also weird that my really strong, super athletic barbarian can just get unlucky and not climb this fairly easy wall. Like I could just roll a natural one and like what? Like I'm so strong and I'm raging and everything. Like what's going on here? So because of that, it it can de-incentivize players to try to do things because if I see I need to get a 20 to succeed on something, I might
Yeah,
as
you're
well
not
not
going to try
even.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's nothing I can really do to make that easier. There's no tactical choices I can make to really make it easier. I could get out a rope, I guess, if I have a rope.
Mm.
But in Tales from Elsewhere, the math is flattened down. It's a D10 that you roll, and what you need to succeed on any given test is either a 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, or a 14. And this is all like very concrete, like, and it means that even if if your character's never shot a gun before, and you're close range to somebody, anybody can pick up a gun and have a decent chance of hitting somebody's center mass. And that gun has a decent chance of really hurting them because it's a firearm. You don't even have to be all that skilled. So it means that characters, even if you aren't a specialist, you can still attempt to do things with a fairly decent chance of success. Now, that same character isn't going to make a running headshot from 100 feet away with their revolver, though, right? That's going to be too hard. But because the players choose how hard things are for themselves based on how far away they are and where they're targeting, it means that you can try a lot of things and actually have a decent chance of success. If you have a tool, if your friends help you, right, there's things you can do to significantly improve the chances. Like you can basically give yourself advantage on any skill test by using both of your actions to do one thing.
Okay.
So you can always try to make things more consistent by doing them slower, right? By focusing in on it, called going all in. So even if I'm not a great shot, never really trained with a gun, I could go all in on really carefully aiming. And I have a decent chance of landing this now because the players control how much risk they take on. But it also means that I could say if a player gets grabbed by a blood oiler in their big mechanical arm,
The
I
blood
can
oiler
say,
is this guy. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, the cybernetic zombie. So, and this thing's like 8 feet tall. It's not, there's no person for scale in this image. So if it grabs with that mechanical arm, you actually need to get a 14 or higher on your D10 plus modifier to get out. Now that means that most characters have no chance of getting free because a natural 10 is not an automatic success. And that's intentional. You have to work together to get free,
Ooh,
right?
okay.
That's the point. Because the game is lower variance, you have more control about what's impossible, like what requires teamwork and what doesn't, because you don't have to worry like, oh, anybody could roll a natural 20 on this and just get out. They won't necessarily need help to get free. Um, so anyway, that was a long-winded rant about probabilities and scaling, but it serves a different purpose. If you make things impossible without teamwork, it means you have to work together to get free. And there's where all those tactical decisions can come in. Your friend gets picked up by the zombie or by the blood oiler, and my, athletics or my might is layman. I'm really bad at this. So I'm getting choked to death. I have no way to get out. My ally could run up and try to pry me free with maybe they're really strong. They could try to take a sledgehammer and break the arm, right, instead, which would get me to drop. Or I'm choking to death, I can't get free, but I could take my shotgun and try to shoot the arm that's holding me to injure it and get it to drop me. There's different ways that the players could solve a problem. Somebody could throw holy water at the arm to melt it, right? Because it's a zombie. So anyway,
So
having more control over your probabilities is an interesting way to motivate teamwork.
and again, different options, different risks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, that's branching decisions. You present the players with an interesting problem. Like, oh no, this guy's getting choked to death by the Blood Oiler, and the Blood Oiler's revving its saw blade, is going to saw him in half next
Oh
turn.
no!
How do we save him? Right. And then you present that to the players, and they have to work together to make tactical decisions to do so.
I also see that you've got a tick box here called backstory skill. What's that about?
Oh yeah, so that's for character creation. The way it works is I'm actually just after this interview, I'm going to be recording a video about character creation. So this is top of mind. Yeah. Okay. So when you're making a character in Tales from Elsewhere, there's no class or race or any of that.
Oh, I like that.
You have three backstory elements, and each of these give you options for which skills you can be good at. So you choose a profession, a culture, and an inciting incident, and you check the boxes next to each of those gives you two different skills, and you check the boxes next to those. And from those skills, you get to pick which ones you're really good at. You can be really good at skills that were relevant to your backstory. So that's what those little check boxes are for.
Okay.
So if you want to make a character that's good at shooting, you can't just be, I don't know, like a gambler who grew up in the big city and lost all of his money. None of those backstory elements would make you proficient in firearms.
Yeah, they go towards other stuff, not that one. Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. So, but if you wanted to be a gambler from the big city who was good at shooting, maybe that gambler is on the hunt as their inciting incident. It means they're out to get revenge on somebody or hunt somebody down. That backstory element, that inciting incident, checks the box for the ranged skill, and now you can shoot firearms effectively. So it's you construct your own class, your own build based on these backstory elements.
Nice.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a fun way to make a character. It lets you pick narrative options that also provide very concrete mechanical bonuses. So you can approach the game with a very mechanical mindset, like, oh, I want to pick these different edges, these different features, and be good at this stuff. Which backstory elements would grant me that? That works. But you can also just pick it purely based on narrative, and you'll end up with a fully functional character in the end.
Which is very cool. I mean,
it's cool.
I'm a massive fan of classless systems because you've just got 12, 13 archetypes, and everyone in those archetypes is pretty much the same.
Exactly. And I found that when you're doing sort of a kitchen sink fantasy, like everything, without a defined world, that if I pick a paladin, there's not actually like, how am I connected to this world is something I have to work with the dungeon master to find out what order I'm in, like where is my temple. Like I have to get from them a lot of things. It doesn't actually come with much built in. With the way in Tales from Elsewhere it works, the profession, culture, and incident are all very concrete and tied to the world. So if you want to, like, you could be a lawman as your profession, and the backstory element talks about the cities where you could be a lawman in. It asks you questions like, are you still a lawman, or did you hang up your badge? It prompts you to make that, because it's all just supposed to be backstory. So you can be a character whose profession is lawman, but maybe you haven't picked up a gun in 20 years, right? Or something like that. You can make a character that's a lawman that isn't good at shooting guns. You can make that choice. Like it's up to you. So that freedom, I think, is interesting. And I think it ties you to the world a little bit more specifically when you do it that way.
So let's see. Campaigner is saying, been watching an anime where the tank is a shield wielder, more than a sword swinger. Stay alive, blocking coming shots, don't run into battle. Hypothetically, you could do that. I think in RuneQuest that would be perfectly viable, but in something like Dungeons and Dragons, I don't think the system encourages that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's tough to make a character that in D&D that actually protects other people. Now, in fourth edition Dungeons and Dragons, you could absolutely do this because it was a very different game, and defenders could mark enemies to make it harder for them to hit other players. Like they had features that do so. But in fifth edition and in third edition, that was all a lot harder to do because you're not as active when it's not your turn, right? So you don't have a way to like jump in front to block for your allies without specific features that grant that ability to do so. Like I'd love to have more of that in my barbarian. I'm an ancestral barbarian, so I have a little bit of that. Um, but yeah, that's the kind of thing, like you're saying, making a character that protects others is a little harder to do in some games. You can do that in Tales from Elsewhere because you can actively block, right? You have reactions when it's not your turn. So you could block an attack that's headed to a friend, and you can specialize in protecting others, which I think is fun and worthwhile because just one attack getting through can blow an
Yeah,
arm off, right? It matters if you can protect somebody from injury. It's very dramatic.
I mean, all the attacks are all injuries are high stakes in the system, so it's yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
it
Yeah, you
becomes
don't
very
want to.
important.
Yeah. Avoiding getting shot in the first place is the big thing. In games like D&D, you tend to just try to mitigate incoming injury. Barbarians try to take less damage from it, as an example. Fighters, you just try to have a bunch of hit points and then second wind to recover them. It's about absorbing the hits rather than avoiding them in the first
Yes.
place. And that's just not the ideology that an injury system can use, right? In Tales from Elsewhere. It's got to be about avoiding getting hit in the first place.
Okay, and another thing you mentioned was that players don't actually get tougher as they go along, but there is an experience system, isn't there?
Sort of, yeah. So when we were looking at that character sheet, we saw those injury boxes. Players cannot ever get more injury boxes. They can
Okay,
get more
yep.
strain boxes on that top right there. So we'll see that some of the characters start with some amount of strain based on their skills,
That's for
and
the
some,
this. You mean the skill ranks
yeah, the
and
skill
other kind of
ranks
thing?
ones.
Okay.
Yeah, so a starting character can have between 3 and 6 strain, which is just for the little nicks and flesh wounds and how you can fuel some abilities. And you can gain a few more if you take specific edges, but you'll never be able to take more lethal injuries than one. Like a character is not going to have ways of doing that. Now, on the back of the sheet, it won't have anything filled in, but there are these boxes for your edges. Edges are like class features, but you can pick from all these different categories. You build your own. And the way you progress in Tales from Elsewhere is you gain more edges. Characters start with 3, and as you achieve milestones, like make it back to town, you gain more edges. And you get to customize your play style in that way. And you get more gear, maybe. You become better prepared. But the numbers on your sheet, like how good you are at shooting, how good you are at running and jumping and lying and fighting, those don't actually change. Your skills are the result of a lifetime of training and not something that advances in a short amount of time.
So you start out as a competent person rather than a complete
Yeah.
beginner. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not the what is it?
It's not the hero's
The
journey
level one
starting.
fighter.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have your wooden shield and your little training sword and you're really terrible and like one goblin can kill you. It's not quite like that. You're supposed to be a fully realized person with a history already. And because the intention of the game is not to tell a story that lasts years in game, right? It's meant to tell stories of survival. It's not the kind of thing you can suddenly train up and be that good at, right? You can't suddenly, go from somebody who's terribly unathletic, like, gets winded running around the block like me, and then suddenly you're a master athlete. You can't really do that.
So again, going back to movie tropes, let's say it's not Luke Skywalker leaving the farm and taking on the Empire. It's more like the man with no name wandering into town and shooting the bad guys.
Exactly. Yeah. And I've found that my personal preference is that I like when characters grow more interesting over time
Yes, yes, yes,
and
yes,
get
yes,
more
yes.
tools, not necessarily going numbers go bigger,
Thank you.
especially
I'm
because,
glad I'm not the
yeah,
only person who thinks that.
no, we're in good company together here because what a lot of games do is as the player grows numerically, so do the foes they fight to stay at parity with them. So yeah, I'm rolling more dice as I grow stronger, my numbers are getting bigger, but all the enemies are also progressing as well because I'm supposed to fight challenge rating appropriate enemies. And so the DM needs to make sure I fight weaker enemies to feel more powerful. But I like in D&D, when I level up, I want to get a new toy. I want to get a cool new thing I get to do. I don't want to see that my rage bonus went from +2 to +3. I mean, that's good,
Hey.
but like give me something cool to do, you know? That's more exciting. Like that's why spellcasters are so fun to level up, because almost every time you level up, you get new toys. You get more spells, either higher level spells or more spells you access. While poor Mr. Champion Fighter, you know, doesn't really get there's nothing really that changes about my gameplay experience.
Yeah, I mean,
Should be about
thinking
growth.
about spellcasters. I mean, like they get that dopamine hit every time they find a new spell. So
Exactly. They get that dopamine hit. And so in Tales from Elsewhere, what you get every time you hit a milestone, you get another edge. You get a new toy that you get to pick. And
nice.
that I've found from all the playtesting I've been doing when I've done the longer form games, they really like to get a new edge. Players are excited to get a new toy because they get to pick from this huge list of features and they can pick from any of them. When you make your character at the start, your backstory elements tell you which types of edges you get to pick. Like, if you like our example of a gambler from the big city who lost all of his money, they couldn't pick like Deadeye or Assassin edges. They can't pick those. They get like interaction and survival ones. But once after character creation, you can pick from any category. You're free to customize however you want. And so players get really excited to start building out cool synergies and abilities they get to pick from. So I like that.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it is a. I like the expansion to make them more interesting, like you said. I mean,
Yeah.
I've been playing ESD6 mostly, and there's
Mm-hmm.
if you go for the basic system, there is no progression there. Like you started
Right.
as this, you don't get any extra anything. You just accumulate treasures, titles, and stuff like that. So,
Yep.
and I'll be honest, that was plenty for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I was a younger man, when I first got to D&D, I like to see the numbers go up more. Like, oh, I want to see how much I can get my damage number to go up, right? That I was much more interested in that form of arithmetic optimization, I guess you could say. I was more interested in that back then. But now, if I want to get into arithmetic optimization, I play a game like Path of Exile on my computer, right? I play like a video game, like an ARPG that's all about like planning out builds and like that's how I
Fair
would do
enough, yeah.
that. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh, and thank you, Anne Sophie W. It's I like the injury system a lot, of course. I'm biased, of course. I think it's really cool. But it's play tested super well over the years, and people really get it when they sit down and use it, and they'll be like, "Oh, this is pretty cool. It's a nice alternative to a more traditional hit point structure."
I like that extra narrative effect. That something that definitely worth thinking more about for other games. I mean,
Yeah,
I will probably be adapting it to other systems I use because
yeah. Well, that's what's kind of fun. Like, I wish, so I have a day job, right? So I can't spend my full time working on game design, but I really want to be working on these other settings to see how this injury system would work in a medieval fantasy setting, right? Like, oh, I want to build that and see how that would work in a different game, like in a different style. Because I think to myself, well, in D&D, I roll a fire, if I cast a fireball, I roll 8d6 fire damage and it hurts them. But what does that look like in a game with an injury system? It starts to sound actually pretty horrifying.
yeah.
To set a bunch of people on fire sounds awful. So it makes me excited to try to see how that structure would work, in different genres of games. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah, I think it would require multiple tables, like if you're setting them on fire, if you're stepping them, if you're poking them with a stick. I don't know if you recall
Yeah.
the old Warhammer Fantasy roleplay system, because that was all about critical damage. I mean,
Right,
it still
right.
had a hit point system, but the thing is that once you get down to zero, you're not dead or dying. You just start taking critical damage, which is what kills you eventually.
Right. Yeah.
There were about mind you, the combat system was already pretty complicated, but
Mhm,
once you get
mhm.
to critical damage, you had about I want to say 5 or 6 tables, depending on whether it was cutting damage, whether
Oh,
it was
interesting.
uh, stabbing damage, if it was fire, magic, or whatever. So,
Right. Yeah, and this won't be a rant that I'll speak for long, but I actually don't. My preference is not making an injury system out of random tables. I think that there's nothing wrong with doing random tables for injury systems, but I think when you let the players get tactical choices about the
mhm.
types of injuries they inflict, that's way more interesting,
it,
right?
it
If
does,
if it's a
does make more sense.
player, right, they get to, it's not just I hope I roll an injury to the leg randomly, right, on the random injury table. You can
Exactly. Yeah.
be, I want to go for the leg, right? It's a different approach.
Different approach. And again, the other thing you mentioned is that expediency and the tables, any kind of table, will slow things down.
Yeah, yeah. If you have to roll a table and then a sub table as an additional step to resolution, it does interfere with the expediency of play. Yeah, and that I think reduces tension.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, absolutely.
keeping tension in a tabletop role playing game can be tough because you're like sitting and hanging out and drinking beers and having pizza and rolling dice, and so the longer it takes to resolve any one thing, the more people's attention tends to wander.
Yeah,
So if you can keep things moving quickly and keep their attention where you want, it I think helps achieve that goal.
yeah, that's a good point actually because yeah, it's not just about keeping things on, but people will check out if it takes too long to for the action to get to them again.
Yeah, yeah. If I'm waiting 15 minutes for my turn to come back because the wizard is using some weird spell that has all these multiple step that we need to do to resolve all these saving throws, I'm just sitting there and I've had I don't know, a cider or a whiskey or something, and I'm like, wake me when we come back to my turn, so I can attack twice with my sword and say I'm done with my turn. Right. Yeah, you have to be cautious about those multi-step resolutions as they compound. The more the more steps each one thing has, you put them in sequence, and suddenly, it's taking a long time to resolve one interaction of some sort
Yeah,
or
I mean,
attack.
especially if you get past a point where there are so many of them that you're going to need to look things up, and then that's when you hit a brick wall.
Right, exactly. Like I was talking to somebody in the Tales from Elsewhere Discord, just kind of workshopping their ideas for a game, and they were concerned that the way they resolved gunfire was too lengthy. And so we were kind of workshopping. They had to choose number of bullets fired, then they had to roll to see if they hit, then they had to roll for armor penetration, and then they had to determine wounds. Like it was very multi-step. And that's very simulationist, which is cool, right? It's very detailed about how somebody could actually get injured. But it involved a lot of individual resolution steps that would take a while to process, right? Turn by turn. And if every player has to do that, and then the enemies have to do that, that's where you get your 30-minute round, right? If you're not careful.
I mean, mind you, I mean, I think that something like that could work, but the players must be there specifically for that. I mean, they want that kind of game.
Yeah. They want the simulation aspect of it. Like I've played some simulationist board games like Flames of War, not board game, war games, where, there's you start with a morale check and then you have to do a supply check and then the tanks have to, and you just go through all of these sequences all to try to simulate in great detail, in this case, various battles in World War II. But it takes an hour to resolve one round. So, after 4 hours, you're halfway through the fight. Different purpose. You got to sign up. You got to be ready for that sort of gameplay. Not exactly what I'd want for more of an action-packed horror role-playing game.
Yeah, absolutely. Because also it's also going to put a hard limit on the number of opponents you can have in a fight scene,
Yeah.
for example. Yeah.
Yeah, because each one is a multiplier
Yeah.
on resolution speed in that way. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So okay, I think we're going to have a look at what people have posted up in the Discord soon. I'm just going to drop a link again in case anyone has anything else to put in. But I did want to ask, do you have any particular I don't know. I mean, something that you either really like or you really dislike, or something that fascinates. Let's put it this way: something that fascinates you about role playing in general.
Oh, just like role-playing games in general?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Like
That's a good question. Okay.
one point that you feel very strongly about.
Ooh, that's tough. So, my favorite part of role-playing games, I will say, and I think the greatest part about role-playing games is that it is a human interaction game, that it is a shared imagination game at the end of the day. I live a very digital life. I'm a software developer. I'm a remote software developer. So like I don't even meet my coworkers in person, right? I'm totally digital at this point. Spend a lot of time at the computer. But when I go to my bi-weekly D&D night, I sit at a table with other people and we build a story and play a game together. And yeah, sometimes the rules of D&D get in the way of that, but no matter what, we're having fun and we can change the game to meet whatever we want it to in that moment. And I think that's so cool. That yeah, the strength of this hobby is the interactive part and the variety you can have. I
Oh
just
yeah,
think that's so
totally.
cool. You can do anything, right? It's not, I play a lot of well, not so much these days, but I've played a lot of video games in my day. And even a game like Baldur's Gate 3, where you have so many options you can do, is still just a drop of water compared to the ocean that is the tabletop side of it, right? Playing with
I
other
know, right?
people
I mean,
as far
like,
as
there isn't even an option to set fire to a tavern.
yeah, you can do it. There's you can do some things, but you can't just burn the whole world down if you want to.
Sure.
You don't really have that choice. Yeah, that's what I think the greatest strength of this hobby is. It's just you can do whatever you want, and you do it with other humans, right? And I like that part. Barring the solo role playing game players, not meant to throw shade on people who play solo RPGs.
Yeah, I'll be honest, haven't tried it yet because I still can't get my head around the concept. I mean, I remember the old fighting fantasy adventure books and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I used to love those things. But solo role playing, like,
Yeah, I've never done it too. I've watched some other people do it, and it seems like it'd be kind of cool. But to me, the social part of the hobby is everything
oh
to
yeah,
me.
absolutely.
That's what it's all about. Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, as long as people are having fun, there isn't really any wrong way to play it. So yeah,
exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's the goal of all of this. Have fun. On my channel, I'm like talking about all the design stuff, but if you're having fun, then like ignore all the design discussion, right? Like just have fun. At the
yeah.
end of
I
the
mean,
day.
like, then again, I mean, I think even the unless you're doing it professionally and you have deadlines and stuff, but even the designing part of the thing is quite enjoyable. Enjoyable, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So some community showcase stuff, it sounds like.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, let me just find out where I put everything. Here we go. Oops. Yeah, there. Okay. So first one up from Zaha Craft, we've got some foam hobbit holes. Okay, I think these were his most recent video.
Oh, wow. Those are incredible hobbit holes, it looks like.
Yeah,
Wow. That's really impressive.
got some lovely detail on them as well.
Yeah. Good photograph too, right? Like I
The
don't know
fl-
anything about photography, but the way they've got the zoom and how some things in the back are out of focus, it's very clean looking.
yeah, I like the framing and I like the extra accessories here. They really add a lot to the scene.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, got some work in progress
Oh,
as well.
wow.
It's all foam. It's all foam and
Wow, that's so
jewelry bits. Yeah,
impressive. I consider myself somebody with a lot of skills. Like but this is not one of them. Making, crafting physical things like this, I'm not good at it. This is so impressive.
yeah. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, I'm still putting together my next video, but that's literally how to make something with literally zero skills and tools. So, I mean, I could test it out on you maybe eventually.
Yeah, that's wow, so cool.
Okay, this one is from Stefano from Chimera Gaming. We ended up, wait 1 second, Rattling Warblaster. Okay.
Oh, is that looks like a Warhammer? There's a Warhammer unit, right? Let me make this bigger.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh, they're a Skaven, I think, right?
yeah.
My knowledge of Warhammer Fantasy is not as much as my knowledge of Warhammer 40K.
Yeah, I'm mostly a fantasy player, not Age of Sigmar. I mean, way back when it was still
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Fantasy
Warhammer
Battles.
Fantasy, not
Yeah,
Sigmar. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I gotcha.
back when it was still good.
Back in my day.
But yeah, I still love the way the patina and the mud are going on in there.
Yeah, the metal looks so good on that. The wear on it, the rust on it.
Even the mud on the wheels and stuff.
Oh wow, yeah, the mud there is such a good detail.
Lovely work. And let's see. Okay, we've got Quest Board Train. There's I'm not sure if it's a book nook or a gaming piece that she's been working on, but
Oh, that's super cool though. It's like a diorama
it is. Yeah,
almost. Oh, that's really cool. Oh, does that fold out, it looks like? Does that
I
open up?
it does open up. Yeah, I think I'm not sure.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
cool.
there's the picture of it opened up, but it does. Yeah,
Oh, that's neat.
I mean for playability, it's super useful to have it open up that way because
Yeah.
I don't know. I've got someone with shovel hands like me. I'm trying to move something in there would be.
Yeah. Especially after have a beer and some pizza in me, I'm gonna knock things over as I D&D night, right? I'm
Yeah, I
already
mean
clumsy. I'm clumsy enough as it is.
the coordination isn't quite there at that point. Yeah,
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you there.
sorry, I said the coordination isn't quite there at that point, right?
Yeah, it's not there day to day, but after a long day at work and I'm at D&D night, it's even worse. Yeah, that's really cool.
Okay, that's the last entry for today. Thanks everyone for submitting. And yeah, definitely looking forward to see more of this Book Nook build over here. But back to our guests. Okay, so you were telling me that Clockworld is quite a way along in testing and so on. So when can we expect to see the final product drop?
Oh boy. So the full product, that's going to be a little, is that what you said?
Yep.
So here's the plan. There is another playtest document coming out in another week or two that's going to have the character creation rules or a percentage of the character creation rules. So then players will have most of what they would need to try the game out. The actual full rule book will be later this year,
Nice.
Q3 or Q4. My current plan is to crowd fund a physical copy of the book. Not because I need funding to write the rules, but I want to make art or I want to pay for artwork. So I've already worked with 3 artists that you've seen. We've shown some of their
Mm-hmm.
artwork on this. They're awesome, right? They're
There.
so good. So I want to crowdfund to be able to get the money to pay them to fill the book with all that cool artwork. I'd like, an art piece for every monster in the book, for example, a
Oh,
piece of art
nice.
for all the backstory elements. I think that would be really great. And to then produce a physical copy and a digital copy. Leading up to that, though, the rules will be just all written already. It's just a matter of funding the visual portion, the artwork. And so at the time of the crowdfunding, whether that's BackerKit, Kickstarter, whatever I go with, people who buy in at that point will have access to the full rules, the full like beta release of the game, just without any of the artwork, because that'll be what the next step is: test it, refine some of the balance, while the artists work to finish the artwork, and then the year after that, the book would come out. So people can play the game right now, just in its beta version, with the playtest documents. And like I said, there'll be another one coming soon that will let them make their own characters, because right now there's just pre-gens, pre-made characters. Um, you can also, if you join the Tales from Elsewhere Discord server, I run playtests myself. I run them for the community pretty frequently, a couple times a month. And I do have EU friendly time slots that I try to do. So they're in the morning, my time, so that it's not 2 a.m. in the EU, as an example. Yeah, later this year, a full rule book would come out. And hopefully that rule book will have a lot of art, assuming I can, get some funding. Because up until this point, I've self-funded the game because I'm just passionate about it and I wanted to get art. But it's expensive to get high quality art from real human artists, and especially because I want to pay them like a fair amount, right? I don't want to try to shortchange artists. I
Yeah,
want
no, I
to
mean, look, artists should definitely be, be getting the right money.
exactly.
They're
Yeah, and the
definitely they're
quality.
very good artistic quality is very undervalued in today's world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I met my wife is an artist, and so like I'm very pro artist. Like I love artists, and I want to pay them all the money. She's not a horror artist, which is what I need for this game. But yeah, that's the plan. Do you allow people to listen in on the playtest? Oh, quest board terrain. Absolutely. What I am setting up are public playtests where I will be playing in Discord, not streaming it, but anybody can come and watch. And Blaze was in one of those actually. Hey, Blaze. He played in one of them recently. Blaze is also an indie game developer, and it was a lot of fun. And I let people watch. There's nothing private about it. There's no NDAs or anything. Um, and if you want to see a session, I actually just finished running one on Avenue Studios last night. They hosted me. They were really nice. And I ran one session there, which was using the playtest packet and the pre-gen characters. So you can check that out. But yeah, the Tales from Elsewhere Discord, I try to do 2 or 3 games a month. Anybody can sign up and anybody can just watch if they want.
I'll see if I can drop a link to your Discord in the
Oh,
chat.
sure.
But
Failing that, if you go to my YouTube channel, the YouTube page has a link to the Discord, or any one of my videos, I think, has a link to it. And I'm in there all the time. I mean, yeah, Karl, I'm like always messaging people and
yeah,
I'm
and
pretty.
what one thing I want to say about your Discord is it's a really lovely community. I mean, it's apart from the game designers and players, there's so many ideas bouncing around in there. It's like, and I've really enjoyed talking to the people there.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. There's a new little like creator community going on there of all of us small time content creators, kind of talking and hanging out. But there's also people just talking game design, working on their own games, and then people giving me feedback now that more of the playtest materials are coming in and just sort of talking shop. So I read all the feedback I get, and I really appreciate it. I don't always agree with all the feedback I get, but I always appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, I think it was. I forgot the name, but he had written a book called Why Soft. Ah, yes, here it is. David Platt, Why Software Sucks. And
Oh yeah.
he did say that you should always listen to feedback. You should never listen to random requests.
Exactly, exactly. Like, I like to hear what the players experience and how they felt, but when they tell me how to solve it,
Yeah.
I don't always listen to that, right? Because they may not have the whole picture. Now, as people become more familiar with the game, now that the game is more accessible and people are playing it more and making characters, um, now people are getting more insight into how the game works, and I'm getting more actionable recommendations. And just, for your community watching, all playtest materials become available first to patrons, then to Discord members, then to the public. So that's kind of the life cycle. We do have a Patreon set up mainly just to help fund artwork, but there's nothing that patrons get that everybody won't get eventually. So Discord members get access to playtest stuff early. So if you're in the Discord, you can actually see the rough draft of the character creation packet. It's in there and playable before the public gets it. And yeah, Blaze died. he he was in a haunted house and he played a banjo to draw zombies to him and got eaten alive, and it was great. Yeah, and lit a bundle of dynamite as he was dying to blow them all to hell. Like it was a good time.
That's a way to go. That's a good way to go.
Yeah, a good way to go. And when I was talking earlier about some groups splitting up and having a tougher
Mm-hmm.
time and some groups staying together, Blaze was in the former of those two, in the splitting up and maybe running into trouble situation.
Yeah, okay. That explains a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay, Peter. Thank you so much for dropping today. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'll probably come bother you in your Discord later anyway. So
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me on. We've been talking just for a little bit now, but I love just talking about game design and chatting with people like this. So super fun. Thanks again.
yeah, and thank you for your insights because again, you've got some really fantastic ideas going on there. Anyone who's interested in games or games design, absolutely go look at the Tales from Elsewhere channel. Lots of good stuff. So yeah, and I will be looking forward to the book when it's finished because the artwork is great and
Yeah.
more of it.
I know, right? Yeah, more awesome artwork in tabletop role-playing games.
Oh yeah, and when you get to the medieval stuff, I want that.
Yeah, you'll get a
want
direct
it.
ping when the medieval stuff is happening.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Peter, and thanks everyone for watching. So have a great week and see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.